Thanks very much. If you can't hear me, if I put my hand, I turned off the microphone. Is that better, Brenda? Don't wind me up. So, welcome to everybody to our lecture this evening. I would like just to do a little bit of housekeeping to start with. From point or another, it will vibrate should you be needed. It is very important that we stay COVID friendly against the COVID as opposed to so friendly to you. So I please ask that you a bit chilly, but it's very important we have good ventilation. We're trying to be an eco tool, and therefore everything that's on the table is, apart from the crockery, and crockery, I have to tell you, is a very recent innovation since COVID. So we're very happy to have crockery, but the crisps and cakes are in throwaway, as is the water. So at the end, there are bins over there which will probably make a bit more central. Otherwise, we'll come round and collect. Because everything that we possibly can, thank you, Graham, we recycle. So, to the business of the evening. Welcome to the 35th yahrzeit of the Harold Weinberg lecture. And I would like to give you a little bit of information about Mr. Harold Weinberg. The annual Harold Weinberg Memorial Lecture is a fitting tribute to a man who greatly valued Jewish education, who served our community selflessly for many years before his untimely death in 1986 at the young age of 65. Harold was the secretary of Whampstead and Woodford Synagogue for over 35 years, between 1950 and 1985, and was on the United Synagogues Affiliated Synagogues Committee and was vice president of the Whampstead and Woodford Synagogue. Harold was also the synagogue's wedding secretary for many years. You have to excuse me laughing. My wedding was number 46. And as I speak, so I smell the cigars and the cigarette smoke of the many meetings that were held in my parents' home. Harold worked for a large multinational corporation as the European financial controller, and he devoted considerable effort to advancing his own education in both his religious studies, and he was a noted Torah scholar, and in addition, secular studies. He studied in his own time and obtained a law degree, and was an active member of the Jewish Law Association. This synagogue remains indebted to Harold for his unstinting efforts during the many years of service, and the annual lecture in Harold's name has been given to many notable speakers, including the late Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. And we look forward to hearing tonight's speaker in Harold's memory, with many more speakers in the future. Thank you and enjoy.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is my honour and privilege to welcome our distinguished guest, Dame Margaret Hodge, to Woodford Forest United Synagogue for the Harold Weinberg Lecture. Margaret was born in Egypt just after the end of the Second World War to a German father and an Austrian mother. Her parents moved to England to escape a rise in anti-Semitism following the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. They set up a steel trading company, which I believe is still operational and highly successful to this day. Margaret first obtained political office in 1973 as a councillor in the London Borough of Islington. She became chair of the Housing Committee in 1975 and was instrumental in the running of large housing programmes to help many thousands of Islington residents who are living in very poor conditions. And I think Margaret would forgive me for saying that her role as chair was not without controversy. She was appointed leader of Islington Council in 1982 the year I first started working in Islington, and she remained chair until 1992. And I think Margaret would forgive me for saying that her time as chair was not without controversy. I think Margaret will forgive me for saying she had quite a bit of controversy. Not least when the Observer newspaper printed the headline, BNP backs Hodge in housing row, following the suggestion that British-born families should have priority to housing over immigrants. Margaret has held several ministerial positions in both Tony Blair's and Gordon Brown's government and became a member of the Privy Council in 2003. And I think Margaret will forgive me for saying that at her time as minister, she had quite a bit of controversy. Margaret was elected to the chair of the Public Accounts Committee in 2010, and I think, well, I think you know the rest. I think it is safe to say, though, that none of the controversy throughout her very successful and distinguished political career has gained as much newspaper and TV coverage, particularly in the Jewish press, as her confrontations with the MP for Islington North, who was then the leader of the Labour Party. But I'm sure Margaret will speak on that chapter shortly. Unlike others, and I must say, including myself, Margaret chose to remain a member of the Labour Party, despite everything that was going on under the leadership of Jeremy Corbyn. I'm certain she will tell us why. And Margaret's going to speak for 25 minutes or so, and afterwards we'll be having some questions. So please do not ask questions while she's talking. We'll come to that later. Margaret, over to you.
I don't think I dare open my mouth after that in case I say something controversial, but I probably will. This is a real privilege, and I'm really thank you very, very much for inviting me. And we are close neighbours because Barking and Dagenham is down the road, so it sort of feels like home from home coming here. But thank you very, very much. It really is a privilege, particularly privilege because I was thought I can talk about myself now. Giving politicians permission to talk about themselves is really dangerous. So I promise you I won't go on for more than 25 minutes. I'm going to talk about being a Jew in politics, and it is quite interesting because I think probably none of you knew I was Jewish until about 2015, 2016, because I never really let my Jewish identity sort of be at the heart of what I was about politically. It never was part of who I was. And I often tell this joke, but it's true, that my old dad used to try and make me a better Jew, and he failed. And the local rabbi trying to make me a better Jew, and I'm afraid, Rabbi, he failed too. And then I went to the London School of Economics, which was full of Jewish students, and my Jewish friends there tried to make me a better Jew, and they failed. And then one Jeremy Corbyn came along and he made me a good Jew. But of course, we don't have a sense of irony, so nobody can understand. I come from a very secular background. I was born in Egypt. My dad came from a Jewish family in Stuttgart in Germany, and they were assimilators. They were part of that community in Germany that assimilated. They probably felt, I mean, they felt Jewish and German, but they felt very German as well as feeling very Jewish. And my mum came from Vienna. My dad arrived in the 30s in Egypt. My mum came down just before the war. And sort of family history has it that she was following a lover down the Nile. And then they got to Egypt and he turned out to be a Nazi. So she abandoned him, met my dad, and then they lived there. And we came over, as you said, we came out of Egypt when I was 4 years old because my dad, this is 1949, and my dad had a stone thrown through the window of the little office that he had. And I think anyone in 49 must have felt so raw after the whole of the Holocaust that he just was too frightened to stay. And interestingly enough, He tried to get in. You know, sadly, you never have these conversations when they're alive, but he tried to go to Australia and the Australians wouldn't have us. He tried to go to America and the Americans wouldn't have us. He tried to go to Canada. He obviously wanted to go to an English-speaking country. They wouldn't have us. And it was only the Brits who had us, who accepted us. And I think that's really, were he alive today, seeing his wayward daughter, which is what I was, being such a member of the establishment, I think he would be incredibly proud of that. He was really very, very anxious that we should settle here. And he was always, always very grateful to the British. But although we were humanists, and although we were sort of assimilators, we were always Jewish. My childhood, I remember, was absolutely full of just having Jewish immigrant families, their refugee families. They were the ones who came to our house for lunch and all that. And our values are Jewish. So I've always grown, much to my children's angst. I have always been a very, very, very strong Jewish mum. I just grew up with all those values. But I've also, because I'm an immigrant, so I am a first generation immigrant, I've also always felt an outsider in Britain. I've never quite felt I belonged. And I think it was because I was an outsider that I joined the Labour Party. I'm going to say 3 things about my history which have influenced me. There are 3 stories. We've all got stories about our family and how they were victims of the Holocaust, and that just never goes away. But the 3 that stay with me is my grandmother. So this was my mother's mother, who at the beginning of the war was 55 years old. She was in Vienna, and she just thought she was too old and nobody would touch her. So she could have got out, and she refused to do so. And then, of course, she was thrown out of her house and put into a flat, and they took her money, and she had to wear a Star of David. And she watched every week as they marched 1,000 Jews a week out of Vienna. And finally, they came for her, and she didn't even get into the concentration camp. They put her in a trench and killed her outside Treblinka. But 9 days before she died, she sent a letter to my uncle, my mother's brother, who was in America. We were all in the diaspora all over the place, which must have been a censored letter, and which we just discovered recently, in which she says 3 times, "Don't forget me completely." So that was my one very poignant experience, personal. My other experience is on my dad's side, where his sister's husband, they started the war in Switzerland, thought that Hitler would overrun Switzerland, so they went to France, took a wrong decision, ended up in France. They were in and out of a camp there and ended up in the Ardèche. And actually, until 1944, were in a tiny village in the Ardèche, being looked after by the villagers there. And then finally, they came for my uncle, and he went. And about, well, it must be now 15 years ago, I went to Auschwitz. He was taken to Auschwitz. And you go into that room where they've got all the suitcases. And I was confronted with this battered old brown suitcase with his initials on it. Now, whether it was his or not, probably not. But that, again, was a very poignant impact on me. And the other thing is, we've just also recently got my grandfather's diaries. This is my grandmother's husband. They were sort of separated, which is why I think he came out and she stayed. And he was put into an internment camp in Guy. And it's just so interesting to read all his stuff. But I'm sure, I don't know how many of you know all this, but literally he was a man, I think he was 65 when the war broke out. He'd been really ill. He ends up in South London, because some of our relatives were in South London. He settled in South London. He sort of had heart attacks. He was sort of, he was an old man, an old, ill man. And they knock on his door at 8 o'clock in the morning, the Brits, and he sort of says, can I ring the doctor to say that I'm medically unfit to be taken away? Couldn't get hold of the doctor at 8 in the morning, so they take him to Guyton, where he sleeps on the floor, and where actually he is interned with German Nazis. And I think when you read about that in his diary, that's quite a shocking reflection on that early period and the attitude here in the UK towards the Jewish refugees escaping from Hitler. All those stories, and I'm sure you've got very, very similar stories in your families, make me who I am. And my heritage really is the person I am today. I joined the Labour Party because I was Jewish and because I was an immigrant. And in those days, it's quite interesting if you look back, if you Google it, you'll see that in the early 70s, there were 58 Jewish MPs. And out of those 58 Jewish MPs, 43, that's about 3/4, were Labour. There were 14 Conservatives and 1 Communist. But they were mainly Labour MPs. And it was the natural home for Jews because it was the party that fought racism. It was the international party, and we were all sort of quite international in our perspective, and it promoted equality. And those were all values that spoke to my background, my experience, my heritage, and what I cared about. So it was the natural party. And it's one of the absolute tragic things that as I stand here today, I'm now the last and only woman Jewish Labour MP in Parliament. There's one other woman who has just joined us, Charlotte Nichols, who's a converted Jewish, but I'm out of the ones that have, fought all down the decades, and certainly the ones that fought Jeremy Corbyn. I'm the last one left. And just looking back on it, there's always been anti-Semitism around. It's all, we've all experienced it. I remember in my early days of politics, I now look back and think I was naive and didn't really understand what's happening. But I remember, for example, Private Eye, very early on. My maiden name's Oppenheimer, and they turned that into, well, she must be related to the South African Oppenheimers, and there were some nasty stories in Private Eye about that. A real sort of anti-Semitic trope, which I just sort of, buried my head and thought, oh, I've just got to ignore it. But it's stayed with me a long time. And I also remember Ken Livingstone in the 80s, when I was leader in Islington, and he was mayor of London. And I used to go to these meetings with him, and he'd always sneer about my maiden name. And then he'd sneer a little bit about my money. And I'd go home and I'd say to my husband, I just don't know, I feel really uncomfortable. I feel he's anti-Semitic, but he can't be, he's an anti-racist. And I think that really was a sort of lack on our part of an understanding where it was. But I will tell you a funny story about those early days. So when I very first became an MP, it was a by-election. Jo Richardson was my predecessor. Some of you might remember her, very feisty, early woman, feminist in the Labour Party. She died, so we were a by-election. So I was being cared, it was 94, so Labour was just sort of really preparing for power. But they were very careful in how they managed it during by-elections. And the Jewish Chronicle rang up and wanted to talk to me. And my Jewish identity was just not relevant to what I was doing at that point. So I said, I don't really know what I'm going to say to them. And the person who was minding me said, well, you've got to give them an interview. So I gave them an interview and I talked about the Channel Tunnel railing, and I talked about which was coming through Barking and going towards Stratford. I talked about the need for housing in the borough. I talked about all those things. And then the interviewer said to me, so what are you going to do for the Jewish community? And I paused and I said, well, not a lot, I don't think. And now looking back at it, the woman who was minding me at the time wrote to me during the time that we were campaigning against anti-Semitism and said, do you remember those words? And of course I don't. But anyway, so that's what, and I've done lots of things, but I thought the most interesting thing to talk to you about would be my fight against the BNP, and then link that really into the world of Jeremy Corbyn. So for all sorts of reasons, so you know that because you know East London, Barking and Dagenham had a fantastically, a really, really quick demographic change. In sort of 25 years, it changed from being a white working class community where I arrived there. I'd never met so many great grandmothers who lived within about 10 minutes of where their great grandchildren were being brought up. And it changed because of housing, because the right to buy led to the privatization of housing. It changed dramatically in a generation. You go back to 1991, it's about 98% of people living in Barking were white. You go forward 2 censuses to 2011, 1991 to 2011, and it's down to 58%. That's a fantastically rapid change. And if suddenly your neighbours change, the faces in the schools change, what's sold in the shops alters, all that changes, inevitably that creates some disquiet. And I think those people which is why those people who are arrogant about understanding the fears people feel about change, I think are just aren't connected really to the communities that they're trying to represent. So I think we understand that. And then of course all the jobs that Ford's went. If you think about Ford's and its high heyday was 50,000 jobs, also 40 to 50,000 jobs, and basically they recruited the kids in the school. You know, they were 14, so you didn't have to get any qualifications. You were sure you were going to get a decent job, good, well unionized job, well paid. You didn't have to worry. All of that went. And then we had a very old-fashioned, inward-looking family hall council in Barking and Dagenham in those days, which, you know, we didn't even bother to count the votes. You'd weigh them in. You were so certain that everybody would just vote Labour. And all that came together. And actually governments who for too long had neglected the left behind communities. Now, only now are people coming to terms with that. But, you know, you'd go onto some of the estates in Barking and there'd be endless needles around and urine in the lifts, and you felt total neglect for the quality of life of people living there. So that mix of demographic change, no housing, because when the housing was sold, it wasn't replaced with new affordable, decent housing at an affordable price, no jobs, a council that didn't care, and also a government that didn't build homes and didn't really care about the environment. So inevitably, there was a vacuum there that if you wanted to have a protest vote against Labour, you voted for the BNP. Fighting that changed the way completely that I do my politics. So I nowadays do very little that, you know, I don't do surgeries actually anymore. I stopped doing them not because of the danger that we face, but actually because it's not a very good way. I want to do things that really connect me to my local community, rather than if you're sitting in a surgery, you're there for about 3 hours, you see 30 people, 10 of them are probably people who come every week, 10 of them are legitimate new faces, and then 10 of them are probably people who are in and out of the borough. They're not long-term residents. And whereas it's not a very good use, takes you 3 hours to do that. It's not a very good use of your time, whereas what I'll do is actually ask 1,000 people to come have a cup of tea with me. And then maybe 50, 70 show up, and we sit on little tables like this, and they all get a good cup of tea and a chocolate biscuit. And then I go table to table and just talk to them about what's uppermost in their mind. And nobody gives a toss about Westminster. They really care, as you do, about what's happening in their local community. So, you know, I couldn't do anything about immigration, which made them very angry. I couldn't do much about building council homes, but I could listen to them and I could react to if they wanted a, you know, bus stop recited or a post box put in a different place, or anti-social behaviour or rubbish, or all those things. So by listening, reacting where I could, communicating with them, both by writing them and inviting them, writing them, telling them what I'd done, keeping in touch with them, you rebuild trust. And rebuilding trust in politics, we can talk about today later on, I think is absolutely central. I spend my life telling my fellow MPs that thinking what happens in the bubble of Westminster is really what people care about is absolutely wrong, until they stop doing that and start really re-engaging and reconnecting in their local communities. They won't know, they won't be doing the right thing. That's the sort of way I changed. But just going back to Nick Griffin, who was the leader of the BNP and who stood and who would have won. If you, lots of you remember 2006, the BNP won 12 seats in Barking in the local council elections. They only stood 13 candidates. If they'd stood the 51 candidates, we would have had a BNP controlled council. I have absolutely no doubt about it. They just romped home. And I knew, so I had a 4-year struggle to draw people back to Labour, including the white working class vote that we had lost. And fighting the BNP was horrific. But what is interesting about it, they were anti-Semitic. I'll never forget on actual election day, when I was going from polling station to polling station, this big thug shouting at me, "Margaret, go back to Germany." And me shouting back to him, "I can't, they killed all my relatives." I was so upset about it. But we did get some anti-Semitism. But the interesting thing is there was no social media at the time. So actually it impacted on me much less in an odd way. I was more protected from it, probably by my staff, but it impacted me on a much less than the social media and the attacks I got from the anti-Semitic attacks I got from the extreme left from 2015 through to 2019. And I think there's this one terrible, terrible story. They put out a whole load of horrible literature about me in their fight against me. And there was a sort of little paper that they put out, 4 sides of A4. They put out just in the run up to the election in 2010. And on the back page was, 10 what people say about Margaret Hodge. And I know I'm controversial, but this was horrid stuff. It was just very vile, full of lies. And we just lived with that. And there was sort of, I had a hooked nose. I mean, there was a lot of sort of anti-Semitic tropes in the way that they portrayed me. What is interesting is I'm writing this up for a book that I'm doing around immigration and integration, looking at that and looking at other parts of my life, the anti-Semitism fight and my own background. And I had this leaflet out on my desk because I was just writing about it. And my member of staff who's been working for me the last 3 or 4 years came to the house and saw it and he said, "What's that?" And I said, "Well, that's one of the BNP leaflets." And he said to me, "My God, that leaflet, that back page of things you hate about Margaret Hodge has been cut and pasted by the extreme left and is now used to attack you on social media." So that link between the extreme right and the extreme left in their anti-Semitism is one of the sort of very scary lessons that I learned through my experience in fighting the BNP. And we've got to remember, even at that time, I mean, racism, Boris was not the greatest. Do you remember Boris talking about black people with pickaninnies, or pickaninnies with watermelon smiles? Do you remember him talking about Obama as having an ancestral dislike of Britain? So it was a sort of time when the right as well as the left was being pretty terrible. So that is an interesting, that fight against the BNP changed the way I did politics. But what we managed to do by this strategy, I do nothing which doesn't help me to connect to my local, to local people. That changing in politics brought people back to Labour and brought the white, wasn't just the new people of colour who moved in, the new immigrants, the white working class returned to the Labour because they felt that we were listening to them, acting, and that we did manage to rebuild trust. And I come to Jeremy Corbyn in the anti-Semitism. I've gone through too long, I can't remember what I started. And all right. Well, I've known Jeremy Corbyn since the 1980s because, as you said, I was leader in Islington Council in '82, and Jeremy Corbyn became the MP for Islington North in '83. And I've just got to say to you that my memories of Jeremy were simply that he didn't give a toss about what happened in Islington. And he was absolutely obsessed in the 80s with Nicaragua. That was the issue of the day. So actually he gave me a really easy time. I didn't mind it because he wasn't critical. We were getting a lot of hassle from the press in those days. We were seen as loony left. We did do some crazy things. I always say that. We did some radical things which have stood the test of time. So we, for example, monitored who got housing to make sure that there wasn't actual racism in the allocation of housing. But we did do crazy things like animal rights. Do you remember the animal? Those early days of animal rights, and my stupid council decided to pass a motion banning fox hunting off the A1, which obviously got us all over the press. But Jeremy just wasn't interested in anything that was happening in Islington, absolutely not at all. And so when I hated his politics. I've always been hostile to the politics of the hard left. I fought them in the 80s, Ken Livingstone and John McDonnell and all those people. We managed to vanquish them in the 80s. I had absolutely no empathy at all with their worldview or their economic view, with any of their aspirations, their revolutionary approach. I had absolutely no link with that. And Jeremy was always on the fringe of it. I never thought he was a main player, but I didn't think he was a racist, and I didn't think he was anti-Semitic. And actually, when he became, although I opposed his election, when he became leader in 2015, people used to ask me, is he anti-Semitic? And I used to say, I just don't think he is, because he's an anti-racist. And I, of course, like probably all of you, I changed my mind. And I changed my mind for all sorts of reasons. Anybody who sees that mural that was up in Tower Hamlets and thinks that that is something that should be protected and promoted and doesn't understand it as a deeply anti-Semitic symbolic a statement is just, I mean, I'll tell you what I do think Jeremy is. I think he's pretty thick. I think he's pretty stubborn, and I think he's pretty vague. And I think those are the three characteristics that inform him. So I do think that was the first of it. Then the pictures of him laying a wreath with the Hamas who were responsible for the massacre of Jews. That video of him at the meeting in 2013 where he said Jews don't understand history and no sense of irony. And then, of course, there was the ARA, the definition of anti-Semitism, and that was almost the last straw, which brings me to the story of how I really, I mean, I started really before all that happened. Having not been engaged in identity politics around my Jewish identity, I started talking to Luciana Berger in about 2015, 16, saying it's ridiculous. We're getting all these anti-Semitic tweets and emails and things. We've got to do something about it. We've got to do something about it. So we did start all of us meeting. And of course, everything that you wanted to do never was very dramatic. This was all before the Enough is Enough demonstration. Because what you really wanted was them to take the allegations really seriously. You wanted them to speed up the way in which they were considered. You wanted them to kick people out of the party who were clearly anti-Semitic. It was though they weren't sort of sexy things to say you wanted to do, but that was really what's what the heart. They were just allowing it to move from the fringes of the Labour Party into the mainstream of the Labour Party. But when it came to the ARA definition of anti-Semitism, I think we'd all had enough. It was ridiculous. The idea that Jeremy Corbyn, who by then had really already lost the trust of most of the Jewish community, had the gall to start playing around with a definition that had been accepted by every other statutory body, not just in Britain, but elsewhere, as a basis for judging anti-Semitism. It was not just arrogant, it's stupid. It was stupid. And so we worked really, really hard to try and persuade him that he should adopt it. And we had a sort of, various meetings. I mean, I have to say, it was always the women. So, it was me working with Luciana Berger, Louise Ellman, and Ruth Smead. It was four of us really working together who were at the heart of the fight against the men. Apologies to the men here, but the men were wimps. None of them were willing, and some of them would not. Even Ed Miliband, I always think if he had stood up and really got himself counted, he could have had an impact, because he was an important figure in both the Parliamentary Labour Party and elsewhere, but he chose not to. So we'd had various meetings, and then we were at the House of Commons one evening. This is actually, it's a weird story. So we were at the House of Commons on one of these nights when we were endlessly voting on Brexit. And on that day, Corbyn had decided that was the day when they would consider our definition. And which was inappropriate because we should have been focusing on the whole Brexit argument. And we were sitting, I was behind the speaker's chair with two of my friends, and the news came through that they had voted to reject the IRA definition. So we were all furious, and I said, I'm going to tell him, he's an apologist for this. This was my two young men on either side. I'm going to tell him he's an effing anti-Semitic racist. So they said, go on, Margaret, go in there, go and have a go. We were behind the chair. He was sitting on the front bench. And I said, no, I'm going to wait for him to come out. And they scuttled away. And one of them, I didn't know, scuttled away and told the newspapers. I wasn't aware of that. I waited for Jeremy to come out. The last thing I said to myself was, you're not going to swear, Margaret, because that will undermine the strength of your argument. So I did call him an anti-Semite and a racist. I said that he'd made the Labour Party a hostile environment for Jewish people. And what was interesting about him is he's passive aggressive, so he just couldn't engage. He wouldn't even engage in the argument with me. So this lasted about 3 minutes, 4 minutes, and I was a bit shaken after that because I remember a couple of friends gave me a glass of water to sort of calm me down because I was cross. And then I went off to the theatre and I switched off my phone and thought, well, I've done it. It's not got me anywhere, but I feel better for having said it to him to his face. And then I switched the phone back on again the next when I came out, and suddenly I realized the whole world had gone mad because this other friend of mine who had sat next to me had gone off to the papers to tell him what I was going to do. And the next morning, I went into, I had terrible toothache, so I had to go to the dentist. This was quite, I'm sitting there in the dentist chair, having this bad tooth dealt with. And I'd taken one of my assistants with me because the phone had just gone non-stop. And I thought it's better she was with me. And she walks into the surgery and she said, Margaret, Luciana's on the phone. And I sort of said, I can't talk to her now. I'm just having my tooth treated. She said, you've got to talk to her. She's absolutely desperate. And then she told me that they were going to suspend me from the Labour Party for having had that confrontation with him. And it really went from there. And I wanted to, it's difficult to know, why is there anti-Semitism? Why is the hard left anti-Semitic? And I tried to think about it. Maybe you've all got some ideas that you can share with me. But I think it comes from a variety of reasons. I think the first thing is they are deeply anti-capitalist, and therefore they have this trope, all Jews are wealthy businessmen. The Rothschilds get more abuse than anybody else. They get massive more abuse than any of us do, those of us being subject to lots of attacks. And so because Jews are seen as successful in the capitalist system, that turns them, that's one of the, I think, motivating factors. The other is they are deeply anti-West and pro-East. You saw that the Skripal, the Corbyn's reaction to the Skripal murders in Salisbury. And again, the Jews are seen as, quite powerful. We always do much better than our numbers. If you think even in American politics, we're much, much more effective as a force in American politics. And they have to always think, where's the Jewish vote going? And that again, so we're associated with West. We're seen as being anti-communist. And that again, although lots of Jews in the 30s, of course, were members of the Communist Party here in London. But again, that encourages. And then the other thing is Israel. And on the hard left, they simply cannot distinguish between the right of the Jews to have that self-determination, which is why we're all Zionists, I imagine, in this room. That right, and they can't distinguish between protecting and really nurturing that right, and then being a sort of paid up member of what I call the Netanyahu fan club, which probably, I don't know what opinions are in this room, but probably where people are divided there on the issue of the Israeli government. I've always been very critical of regimes. I've always felt that they haven't helped build towards the two-state solution. in the most active and progressive way. So you can be a supporter of Zionism, you can be a Zionist and a supporter of the state of Israel, but you don't have to be a member of the Netanyahu camp. And actually on the hard left, they can't see that. And Palestine, Israel has become the totemic issue in a crazy way, which is completely incomprehensible, to the expense of all other massive international injustices. And it just is really, ask me why I don't really know, but it's very frustrating when you see other communities being torn apart, like Myanmar or China. You go all over the place and see that. And I think that's where it comes through from the hard left. And for the other thing to say about it is, one of the horrors of this anti-Semitism is it is mixed with misogyny. So there's a sort of right-wing, there's a terrible right-wing website in America called Stormfront, which a Jewish organization did some analysis of it. And there, there's a huge attack on feminism, and the attack on feminism is all often linked to anti-Semitism. So 60% of the anti-feminist attacks also are anti-Semitic attacks. So it looks like Jews are all responsible for feminism. But more interestingly in there, out of the MPs in Britain who have mentions on this particular website, prominent Jews like Ed Miliband or John Bercow, both of whom, much more prominent than me and Luciana, but we got 15% more mentions than they did. So there's a very strong link between misogyny and anti-Semitism. And it's been horrific. I mean, all I can say to you, those years have been horrific. And I don't want to offend you. I mean, if I just say to you that in the 2 months from when the EHRC report came out last November, it's about a year ago now, and then Corbyn was in and out of the Labour Party, if you remember. In those 2 months, I got 90,000 mentions on social media, 90,000 in 8 weeks. I mean, to be fair to CST, who are doing a wonderful job tonight for us, CST monitor my social media for me so that I don't have to look at it and refer as and when they need to the police. But I pulled out some, and if I offend you, I apologize, but I think you need to hear what we got. One of them was, why has half of 1% of our population got so much power? Rid us of this cancer. Then I get regularly called a Zionist stooge, a Zionist bitch. A swastika is appropriate as Israel is a fascist state. Margaret Hodge is a Zionist pig, and hopefully Hezbollah will catch up with the bitch. And then 2 horrible ones. One is nothing but a couple of shit-stirring cum buckets bought and paid for by Israel. About time these cretinous pieces of shit effed off back under their stones. And another one, I want her to feel despised. It's what the bitch deserves. I hope somebody kills her, I really do. She's a lying, deceitful, hateful bitch who needs to be executed publicly so we can watch and laugh at her. The only support she deserves is a handrail to climb the gallows, the vile effing sea. And that sort of is run of the mill. And it's not just that it's horrible for me, it's horrible for my staff. It's, who have to see it, they get to it before I do. And I just can't underplay the really, really massive support that I've had from CST right the way through it all the time. But I want to tell you one interesting story about this, because there are always stories of hope. All this about the Corbyn thing happened in July, and I went off August. The whole of August, I was on the phone every day to Mishcon, who really generously supported my action. I wasn't going to let them kick me out of the Labour Party. So I came back in September, and we always have our big party, Labour Party meetings in the first Thursday of the month. And I suddenly realised that the whole of August had gone back, July, August, and I hadn't talked to any of the Barking Labour Party people. And we've got a big Muslim contingent now in Barking Labour Party, probably about 20, about a fifth to a quarter of our party members are Muslim. And I had never talked to them about being Jewish. It had never been a sort of a relevant issue to talk about with them. So I said, oh my goodness, I haven't fixed this. What's it going to be like? Walked into the room and there were 300 people there. And I thought, oh my God, they've organized against me. This is going to be terrible. And then I thought, well, what do I do? So all I could do was tell the story as it is. So I told the story about my background, a little bit what I've told you tonight. And at the end of this, and this is the message of hope, I did get a standing ovation. And Muslim after Muslim got up and said, what you're experiencing as a Jew is what we experience every day through Islamophobia. And I think as Jews, particularly given the Palestinian and Israeli conflict, I think it's really important that we hang on to that understanding as we try and build a tolerant community here in the UK. Why did I not leave? I'll say a little bit about that. You know, it's sort of, had huge respect. In fact, one of my closest friends is Louise Ellman. And I've got huge respect for Luciana. Louise and I go back. She was leader in Lancashire when I was leader in Elizabeth. So we literally go back two of the early women leaders in local government to the early 80s. And we're about the same age. So we've just been very friendly, yonks. And I totally respect the decision that they took. And I think it was difficult. For me, I've now been a Labour Party member since I was 18. I'm 77, so that's nearly 60 years. And I wasn't going to allow anybody to kick me out of the party and to take over my party with a set of values, which was just such an insult and an anathema to everything I believed in and valued. And I wanted to fight it. Now, what I can tell you in confidence here is that what I had promised myself, my line was that if in the last general election we'd ended up with a hung parliament, which was the best we'd ever got to, and there was any suggestion that Corbyn might become prime minister, at that point I would have stopped him being prime minister, because it would have been a hung parliament. And there were probably I talked about 5 or 6, there were 5 or 6 of us who've done that. So that was how we chose to do it. And actually, as times proved, I think we took the right decision. But I have absolutely total respect for those who felt differently to what we did. Since Keir has been in, it's not all been, easy. He has been. I have to say, I was one of the first people who rang up after he became leader of the Labour Party. And given I voted for Lisa Nandy, that wasn't easy for him either. But he rang a number of Jewish people up, and I thought that was just an important statement to be made. He has shown zero tolerance. We've kicked hundreds of people out of the Labour Party. You don't hear it, but if you, I don't know how many, if there are any Labour Party members, there aren't many Jews who are Labour's member party. There are hundreds, literally, across London in particular, and actually up in Liverpool, at places like that, where they are just being kicked out of the party for racism, and the party is being recaptured by people with the values that we would support. I think the dealing with Corbyn was clumsy, and when they didn't tell me what they were going to do, but they had sort of done a deal with him, and literally I was coming up, it was a terrible morning when I'd been to visit a friend who was dying of cancer, and I'd taken them a casserole. Came and my phone had gone off as I was going in, and I thought, I'm going to spend this hour with her, talking to her. Came out, started ringing back to be told that Corbyn was going to go back into the Labour, can't be let back into the Labour Party. And I have to admit, I said, if that happens, I'm leaving. And I think that did help to convince Keir Starmer that might not have been the best of ideas that he's got. And I think Corbyn now will not be a Labour candidate at the next general election. So I think he's done that. We've introduced a massive education program around talking to people about anti-Semitism, because people, particularly this issue around Israel and Palestine conflict, people just don't get it. So you've got to find what language they can use, and what shifts over the line into anti-Semitism. Keir spends a lot of time talking to the Jewish communal organisations, which Corbyn has refused to do. We're setting up a new system for dealing with complaints, which all the Jewish communal organisations, the Board of Deputies, everybody has been involved in. We've all been on a working party trying to work that through, and that is just being, as we speak, put there. And it feels just so different. And I'll tell you the story that I told. I mean, I know there's a long way to go to rebuild trust with the Jewish community, and that's what I will try and do in the years that I carry on being active in the Labour Party. But I'll just end you with this story, because I've just come back from Labour conference. It was in September, and I hadn't been to a Labour conference for a few years because I couldn't stand going if Corbyn was there. And people said to me, "You can't go on your own, Margaret. You've got to go with somebody. It's really dangerous for you to go." And I thought, this is ridiculous. I've never been frightened of doing this. I'm going to go. My staff wouldn't let me go alone. They then said to me, "You can't come in the front door. You've got to go back door." And I said, "No, I'm not doing that. I'm going front door." And I had to give a little speech, which I haven't done for ages, from the platform. So I was a bit worried, and I thought, they're going to start booing me and shouting at me. How am I going to deal with that? But actually, I came out of that. It was literally a 2-3 minute speech. It was a very, very short speech about the anti-Semitism. And I got a fantastic standing ovation. And I think that also reflects, a massive transformation within the Labour Party. But, and I'll end on this, my old dad, who of course had to flee 2 countries, and my children are the first generation in our family who haven't had to flee from a country because they were discriminated against and hounded as Jews. My old dad always used to say to me, "Keep a packed suitcase at the door, Margaret, in case you have to leave in a hurry." And I think that still is always at the back of my mind. So whilst I now feel comfortable back in my family, my Labour family, I always have at the back of my mind, I may have to fight for my continued peace and existence. Thank you very much.
I'm going to pose very open questions, but if I may, I'm going to ask the first one. As Keir Starmer chose to serve under Jeremy Corbyn, how can we trust him?
Well, a lot of the very good people, in fact, I often say, people say Labour's got no things good. You're starting to get to know those people, because there are people who didn't serve under Corbyn. Wes Streeting, who's quite local to this, I think is a really talented young man who will emerge. Rachel Heath, another talented woman who will emerge. There's a lot of you, British, some of these you won't know yet, but you will get to know them over the next 5-10 years. There are a lot of really good, Peter Kyle, Peter Brightmansky. There are a lot of really, really good and talented MPs. I suppose in the same way that I said in the Labour Party, he said on the front row, I couldn't have done it. I don't support it. But he was one of the people. I remember a conversation with him. I knew he was going on with today's programme the next morning, and Corbyn had done something terrible. And I sort of said, "You've got to attack him tomorrow." I caught him in the corridor, and I have to say he did. So he did stand up for us so I understand how it goes on. But one of the most actually depressing, terrible moments in my life, which I'll show you. I hope nobody's going to put this. We're not even from any Jewish press here.
No.
One of the most terrible things was when we were selecting our new leader when Corbyn went. We had this hustings at at the Parliamentary Labour Party meeting. And they were all sitting there, and they all got up, one after the other, saying, anti-Semitism was the most terrible scourge, terrible stain on our reputation. It was the most awful thing. And I just sat there thinking, where the bloody hell have you been over the last 4 or 5 years? So there is a bit of me that feels that. But can I just say something else, which I might not have said to you? Staying in was really hard. It wasn't an easy choice. And I got quite attacked by the Jewish community. I got some quite nasty attacks from somebody accused me of being a member of the Capitol. It was nothing we did, nothing. There wasn't a right choice at that time. And it just, you had to do what you felt you could live with. And for me, I thought, I'm going to fight him. I'm going to try and get rid of him on the 2019 election. If we'd lost, if actually Rebecca Long-Bailey had won, I'd have gone. So there were various things, there were trigger points which would have taken me out. So I think Keir's got us, I don't know how he did it, but he has, all I can tell you is it hasn't just been words, it has been action. He has sort of stood by his commitment to me on, within the hour of being elected, that I am going to, zero tolerance to anti-Semitism in the Labour Party is going to be a #1 priority. And he really is pursuing that in his actions, not just his words.
Graham,
I'm a bit deaf
sorry,
as well,
will you
that's
just
a
repeat the
warning.
questions so it picks up on the recording as well?
No, that's good.
I was really interested in the campaign for cases involved in the Jewish youth. And I'm not very confident in the way that the efforts are exactly dealing with that. There's lots of things that they want us to polish. One of the things is all the things stand down. It's a terrible symptom, and we should expel them. There's no good in being completely out, and that doesn't happen. And I think this is good grounds. I feel very, very hard in show that really you're dealing with this particular thing. And he is like a lead, strong, he's not a strong guy, but he's got that presence. And that presence is excellent. I think you've got a lot of Jewish brothers.
Which is all I could do. I mean, I was desperate. I've survived all the time, when he was leader. And I'm saying, my daughter rang up and said, what are you doing, Mum? You managed for 4 or 5 years. You're not saying you got here and you're on. And what? He was suspended, which would have led to expulsion. That's how it goes. And I mean, at that point, when was that? We did not control that committee. That's why we had to change the complaints mechanism. We just did not, the momentum people, the old trots, controlled the committee. So the only thing that Keir could do, which would have, allowed me to stay, was say, okay, we can't win that one. He will not be allowed into Parliamentary Labour Party, and he will therefore not stand as a Labour MP ever again. I mean, it's not, I would like something more clear cut and final, but I don't think we're going to get it. What can I say? I don't think we're going to get it. We've argued for it
A gentleman
Then Margaret, didn't what you said. that, I think the Jewish people would say and stuff.
if I can repeat the question, are Jewish people safer with a Conservative government than a Labour government?
I mean, there is anti-Semitism in the Conservative Party too. You know, up in Peterborough, there's been sort of recently an incident where I tried to intervene, actually, where the MP has supported an absolutely open anti-Semite and been out canvassing with an anti-Semite. I don't think it's peculiar. In fact, what I'd have said pre-Corbyn is it's everywhere, right? It's everywhere, but it's on the fringes. What Corbyn allowed to happen was it to go from the fringes to the mainstream. I think the Jewish community is safe under Keir Starmer. And I think I would say that, wouldn't I? That after the shambles that we've got at the moment, if you want a non-corrupt government led by a decent man, Keir's your man. I mean, at the moment, don't get me on the. I'm writing a book at the moment, which is going to be published, I hope. And I'm a visiting professor at King's College London, and they're going to publish it for me. Because I do a lot of work around tax justice, and what that's led, now Britain has become a jurisdiction of choice for a lot of dirty money. Kleptocrats, drug smugglers, money launderers. They use Britain, and what has now happened is that has infected our body politic. We are now, there are so many instances of corruption. So I think you're safer with us. Let me just give you an example, which was what somebody said they saw me. I was trying to do. Nobody would listen to me today in Parliament. There's all this stuff going on about Owen Paterson, which is terrible. And the worst is, is that he got this company, Randox, got 2 very, very lucrative PPE contracts where they failed to deliver the masks. They didn't have the hooks were wrong, so they had to bin 500,000 masks or something like that. But if you look at Russian money, I don't know if I've got any Russo files here, but if you look at Russian money in the Conservative Party, it's appalling. So there's the Chinukins, where she has given £2.1 million to the Conservative Party. She's the woman who played tennis with both Cameron and Boris. And out of this is the work I do around tax justice and finance. In what were called, there was a bunch of leaks before the most recent Pandora leaks called the FinCEN leaks, and that showed that the Chinookin family were getting money, laundering money into the UK that they'd stolen from Russia. There's another guy called Fedotov who runs a company called Aquind, and he has got all his money out of the energy sector in Russia. And again, that has come out through to France. And he has given probably in excess of £2 million to the Tory party, to everybody from the Chancellor through to the Minister in charge of corporate responsibility, through to the just every minister in about 5 cabinet ministers. So we are really in danger in all sorts of ways, whether it's the contracts, whether it's the appointments, whether it's the peerages, whether it's money for influence. There's a raft now of ways in which our reputation as a trusted jurisdiction, which abides by the rule of law, is really in danger. So if you say to me, are we safer with a Jew safer? I think in that very general sense, we cannot allow our society to be undermined in our democracy to be undermined in the way that Johnson is doing at the moment. It is scarily awful. I can talk about this for hours, but it is scarily awful. So I think you're safer with us, and I think Keir will never allow anti-Semitism to go from the fringes to the mainstream. It'll always be a little bit there. It'll always be a bit there. You can't get rid of it. It's there. We know it in our day-to-day lives. But for it to come into the centre of the party, to infect the heart of the party, that will not happen again in my life anyway. Never say never. Hence the suitcase at the door.
So Margaret, I say this is something that doesn't affect you. In fact, there's a video of you on YouTube, you defeating the DFP in 2010, and it was really instrumental in making me a social democrat. But I find it dangerous when we put anti-Semitism and Islamophobia together. The bulk, the majority of anti-Semitic hostility and activity today is from intolerant elements within Europe's Muslim community. Now, I actually think that it's the responsibility of social democrats to be able to speak honestly about those intolerant elements within Europe's Muslim community. But I believe they have failed to do so because the left found an alliance with these hostile elements. I'm at the epicenter of this problem at UCL, and the President of the Israel Society there. Actually, the woke left, or the identitarian left, have found really great partners in aggressive Islamist Palestinianism. And I think that actually what needs to happen is that we need to not use the term Islamophobia, which almost makes Islam immune from all scrutiny and criticism. And I think it's the responsibility of genuine anti-racists to go beyond the political correctness and speak honestly about what's threatening Jewish lives in Europe. The far right, though it exists, is simply not as great a threat as from these intolerant elements within Europe's Muslim.
Well, what I think I disagree with you about is that I think the far right, if you look at everything that everybody says to you and all the research evidence tends to say that the far right remains a bigger threat in Europe, and you've got to look at, Poland, Hungary, you look at some of these states. So I think there is a huge threat from the far right. I don't think and that's traditionally where most anti-Semitism came from. So don't think that's gone. I think it's a real present and difficult danger. But I think, maybe I'm running away from an issue. I think you raise a really, really difficult issue, because what you don't want to do, you don't want to tar every Muslim with the values of the extremists. So we have to find a way. So, the people who the Muslims in my Labour Party who got up and gave me a standing ovation for fighting anti-Semitism, I want to make common cause with them. I want to make and I think that's in the interests of long-term peaceful coexistence and tolerance. So whilst you've got a real point, I think probably we need to talk further about how, and a lot of people say to me, one of the reasons that anti-Semitism has grown in the left is because of the growing presence of Muslims within the Labour Party. And it's a very delicate, difficult issue which we need to talk about. But somehow in the same way as you can't put all Jews together, some of them, have been pretty offensive to me, Jews. You've got to find a way through that. And I'd like to talk to you about it. I don't think there's an easy, straightforward answer to that. Because we just don't want to tar most Muslims are as hostile to anti-Semitism as you and I are. Now, not all, and you're right to sort of link it to, the far left Palestinians. It's just a hard way. So how do you walk that tightrope to make sure that you don't alienate those that you want to keep in there, whilst recognizing the threat that comes from the extreme? And I think that's a hard tightrope. So any help you can give in trying to navigate that better, more than welcome, and happy to talk to you about it.
Sure.
Very Margaret, thank you for what you're saying. But we're all talking about anti-Semitism. It shouldn't be there. But why is it there in the first place? And it's from education. The religious educators, they do not tell you the history of the Jews. They don't tell you that today, in Israel, in Palestine, Muslims are in high office, members of parliament. There's no apartheid. The press doesn't say that. Ken Loach, in one of the last meetings, he said Israel has apartheid. And it's education. If they don't know the history of the country, they don't even know where the word Palestine comes from. It's not a people. It's not a country, it's a people, a volatile, the Philistines. And our history goes back thousands of years. King Solomon's temple was built.
Education program, which we're taking round with everybody. No candidate can stand without having gone through it. Every MP has gone through it. Every chair of every local, every Labour Party has gone through it. Everybody who's a councillor has gone through it. So you've got to do an education program. I couldn't, in the end, I think it's, a top into showing, zero tolerance, an education program, and reaching out to rebuild trust. Those are the three bits of action that you can take. So I think education is absolutely hard. And the Holocaust education, I mean, people are doing stuff around that. Right, I've got to raise my voice. Sorry, did you not hear that? Yeah, I'm a bit
The question is why Barking? Why become an MP there?
Well, go on.
I think that's the question.
Was it because of the?
Did you become an MP in Barking because of the MP?
I mean, to be honest, I've got 4 kids, right? And I always said when the children were little, I'm not going to be an MP because I want to spend the time with the children. I thought it was bonkers trying to be an MP with children. And I was always very friendly. If you come from Barking, I was very friendly with George Brooker, who was the old leader for a long time at Barking and Dagenham, and he and I used to do it. And so I gave up politics in '92. I'd had enough. Labour had lost about 4 elections, and I thought I went off to do something else. I was going to run a big voluntary organisation, and I always thought I like Barking. I like the seat. I like the people. And then Joe died, and so politics is a bit of, I describe it as a drug. You get a lot of lows, but when you get a high and you get something done, you're really, really proud of yourself. And it was a sort of drug. And when the seat came up, I thought, oh gosh, if I don't go for it, I shall never forgive myself. So I just went for it. But it was really because I knew George Brooker really well, pretty close to where I live. I didn't want to move the children from the schools they were at. And it just sort of, I like the community. I like the community. And on the BNP, I should have known, I often say to myself, I should have known in '94 that was the beginnings, when things were beginning to happen. And in 2001, we had one of the lowest turnouts in the general election. It was 40-something%. It was really, really low. And by that time, people were beginning to get really angry and feel left behind and feel nobody was listening to them. And the protest vote against Labour was starting. And I should have picked it up sooner. But we were all frightened about talking. I mean, we talk about how we tackled the Palestinian extremists and the Muslim extremists. We were all frightened about talking about immigration, weren't we? Nobody dared talk about it and think about people's real, how could you make it work, and how could it be a celebrated feature of Britain? We've always been a sort of country of immigrants. We're all here because we're immigrants, all of us. Some of us 1 or 2 generations, some of us like me, and I myself am an immigrant. But we never talked about it. And we should have done that much sooner and listened to people's understandable concerns and just sort of try to respond to that whilst never, ever allowing yourself to be racist, ever.
Yes, I know I'm quite difficult here, but I think it's really, I mean, I work in membership council and I work with young people from across the whole borough, and I think it's really, really, really important that we work together. That we don't have this split about them and us, all got to fight, all kinds of racism, anti-Semitism, right across the board. And I know personally I've had it quite difficult here in this, and I'll say in this community. My daughter's down at our rent. She's very probably very pro-Corbyn at the time. She has changed her mind a lot now. She has. And, but it's controversial and it's quite difficult. I found personally quite difficult being part of the community of having. So my question is, I just want to say I support you. I think what you've done is amazing, and I think actually what we all need to do is work together with people across the whole borough or across the whole country. We need, and this kind of, you know, it's not really a question, but I think it's important. We don't have them and us.
I mean, I agree. Well, I agree with you. My whole life has been. That's why I fought the BNP, and that's why I fought the anti-Semitism. My life has been one of fighting racism, and that's been really, you know, from that's been what drives me and gets me motivated, and trying to build respect communities. And you know, we're all stronger by being together. We really are stronger by being together, and we've just got to learn that the value of everybody makes a better whole.
Let's move back.
Margaret, you said that the prayer, you said the women stood up. Do you now recognise that there are men in the that have seen the errors of their ways and they're now going to fight against anti-Semitism, or is it still the strong name kind of men that are doing the
There've been some really good men. I mean, I say that. I'm sort of conscious that there are 3 Jewish men in the Parliamentary Labour Party, and they have not been very vocal. But there have been some. John Mann, who is now, you know, he's been really good. Ian Austin, who sadly left the party, but he was a good. Wes Streeting, Wes was always there to support us. So there are Peter Carver. So there were some really powerful men. I mean, if I can tell you, going into meetings of the Parliamentary Labour Party when Corbyn was our leader, you had to brace yourself, and you'd think, are you going to get attacked? Are you going to get, you know, who's your friend in here? You really, that was the sort of, it was a difficult thing. So, oh, well, God, none of them, everybody now comes up, you know, people who never said anything to me for 4 years, now come up and said, God, you were brilliant. You really fought that anti-Semitism, Margaret. But I could have done with them in 2016, 2017, 2018.
Right. Jeff, I'll come to you in a moment. About 13 o'clock. Thank you.
Yep.
Yes. Margaret's happy to answer the question shortly, but let them 13 o'clock and do the question. Jeff, you'll be the next one. Ladies and gentlemen. Yeah,
Hey, Margaret, do you think that the election and its tactic will help you?
Well, help against the fight against anti-Semitism.
so the question was, does Margaret think that the elected benefit is there and the coalition will fight against that?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I don't know. I'm sure there are people who can answer that better than me, really. I mean, we've got to wait and see whether, you know, it's certainly a move in a better direction. It's certainly sort of hope, you know, hopefully I don't, you know, I get depressed. I'm sure, like all of you. I mean, I'm a two-state solution person. Most people in this room are two-state solution people. But trying to get there becomes harder and harder. So whether they can take a sufficient initiative to get people back to the negotiating table, and whether the Americans will do, whether Biden will do anything to try and encourage it, I just don't know. It's certainly better than it was, right? Whether it's good enough, time will tell. And whether we will really, they've somehow got to, in the end, it's a bit, you know, Northern Ireland, the IRA had to talk to the nationalists. They just had to, in the end, they had to talk. And that, you know, you build peace. Yesterday's terrorist does become the person with whom you've got to negotiate to make peace. And that's a really, really, really difficult transition.
I agree with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Until they do so,
Yeah.
we want to know how we
Yeah. I agree. But can we
Ladies and gentlemen,
can
sorry,
we
can
get?
I please ask you to the table and not eat my drink, but you do have your mask?
and ask me for
Or if you ask me questions. Any further questions? Yes.
Thank you. So Margaret, you said earlier about finding an example they can't found it to identify standing up for COVID. Or people would say it's an accident,
There is a very, I'll tell you what is interesting, is there are one or two people in the Parliamentary Labour Party who have discovered Jewish heritage. They really are. Kate Green is one who discovered, I can't remember if it was a mum or dad, he discovered one of her parents was Jewish. And that only came out during the issues of anti-Semitism. There are some, how can I be polite to them? There are a few oddities who belong to an organization called the Jewish Voice for Labour. And they are completely unrepresentative. They are very, very isolated. One of the things that people, you know, talking about Jews in the Labour Party, one of the refreshing, I chair the parliamentary branch of the Jewish Labour movement, have to, because there isn't another Jew to do it. So unopposed. But there is the Jewish Labour movement is now very active. And actually, during the anti-Semitism, we massively recruited. There's about, you know, 4,000 or 5,000 members of it now. We were a tiny little organisation before. And what is so great is there are a lot of very young people in there, really young people, who share the values, the lasting values that put me into the Labour Party around equality and tolerance and, you know, internationalism, all those, and fighting racism. They share those values and they see a future in the party in it. So I do get when the hard left in Barking Dagenham tried to get rid of me recently, just before the last general election, I thought, what on earth am I doing at my age, bothering with all this stuff? And actually, it was the young people. I wasn't going to let Corbyn win. I am a bit controversial, but it was the young people in the Jewish Labour movement who really worked with me, to make sure that we actually saw them off good and proper. And there are these young, really, really brilliant activists who are I hope will be the next generation. We of course lost one of the best Jews in David Miliband.
We have a question from people watching on Zoom.
We've got a question from Nicholas Neville watching on Zoom. The question is, and we've talked about how safe we are generally under Labour, and that we feel more safe under Keir Starmer. A completely different question. We've seen, his words, erosion of the rule of law with the present Prime Minister and trampling on democracy, his words, I'm not really disagreeing. Are we safe under the present government? Perhaps more generally in terms of as a democracy, not just from the Jewish perspective.
Whoever said that question is, I completely and utterly and totally agree with that. I think, am I allowed 2 minutes on this one?
Please do.
If you look at our democracy, it's very fragile. We don't have a written constitution. And so we're dependent on checks and balances that are there traditional. And if the checks and balances of Parliament, they're the press, they're the judicial system, they are the civil service, all those are sort of checks on the power of the executive. And what's happened is just under Johnson, I mean, there's always been there's always been naughtiness in both parties, but under Johnson, every time one of those checks, attacks what he's trying to do, or tries to stop him doing what he's doing, he doesn't just take it. He then tries to destroy the institution. So when we had the thing about the proroguing of Parliament, which was found to be unlawful in the courts, you'd have thought he'd just get on with it. What is his reaction is to have a review of judicial review. So it's more difficult to take action, to use the law as a check against the executive power. And that bill is just going through Parliament, and he's changing the way judges are appointed. Parliament is now completely set aside, and you saw that with Owen Paterson last week. All those MPs, I don't think any of them, I mean, I work a lot with the Tories because I spend all my time trying to go across party alliances. And none of my Tory friends wanted to vote for what they were saying last week, but they all go like sheep, to the slaughter. And Parliament is now, he just doesn't bother with Parliament. You can see that he didn't feel he needed to come today, Boris Johnson, to explain himself after the fiasco. Civil service, if they now disagree, they get sacked. The press, they're trying to undermine the BBC license fee. And whatever you feel about the BBC, we've got the best free press, in the world, and we destroy that at our danger. So all those pillars of democracy are being undermined. And then whether it's cash for honours, cash for influence, cash for appointments, cash for contracts, you can just go through everything now. And it's just scandalous how, there's a sort of sense of entitlement that I'm afraid this government has got, that they think because they won this election, they only had, less than 30% or something people voted them. I can't remember. The figure is quite low about the number of people who actually voted Conservative. But that's given them a sense of entitlement. And on the money, they don't think it's taxpayers' money. They think it's their personal money. And that is scary. So I am really, really concerned about the future health of our democracy. So I agree entirely with that question that, it would be Keir Starmer would be absolutely 1000% different and, would protect democracy and accept the rule of law. Total different kettle of fish.
Right, Rabbi, a few words.
Oh.
Wow. I'm glad you didn't speak for only 25 minutes because you covered so many things. Absolutely unbelievable. Can I? Oh, yes. Okay. I'll say that again. I was just saying, originally we were told we're going to get 25 minutes, but we've fantastically, we've had a very long session. Something that is not used to listening to other people, but more often speaks myself. I often fall asleep and I was wide awake, absolutely fascinating. So just first of all, I want to say a huge thank you, Dame Margaret, to you for joining us and for speaking about the challenges. The incredible challenges that you face. Also, just want to say a particular welcome to two of our local councillors that are actually here tonight, which is Daniel Morgan Thomas, who's the councillor for Wanstead Village, and Beverly Brewer, who's the councillor for South Woodford, who've been extremely supportive of the community. Keep nudging me when we're going to get a permanent menorah in South Woodford, and just wonderfully supportive. And thank you for being here tonight to support the event as well, and for all that you do for our own and for the wider community as well. Dame Margaret, you spoke very eloquently, very calmly, and one of the things that struck me is that you haven't obviously lost your faith in humanity, despite the challenges that you face. You know, you just mentioned John Mann MP. I think he's now Baron Mann. I always remember many years ago when he became the chair of the all-party, what's it called, the inquiry into anti-Semitism, and he said that someone came up to him and said, "I didn't know you were Jewish." He said, "I'm not." Basically, the unspoken question was, "So why do you care?" And I think a very important point here is, Raina touched on it. Yes, of course, we have a particular concern for anti-Semitism being Jewish, but actually there's a bigger concern for what it says about our society when it goes unchecked. And it's not just about how we feel as a community, it's about the implications for our society and for the values that we hold dear. And for all those reasons, we thank you for the stand that you've had to take. And as I said, you glossed over it very eloquently, but you mentioned 90,000 messages on social media. I'm guessing most of them weren't very complimentary. And as somebody that I know, you know, sometimes I've done things and you get one message from someone that's slightly offensive. And when our TV program was on YouTube, there are a few comments on it. And, you know, you have hundreds of positive comments. It only takes one remark to really knock your confidence. I can't imagine what it's like to get the kind of abuse that you and others have received. I, of course, was in Liverpool from 2011 to 2015. Luciana was our MP. I knew Louise Ellman very well from the Jewish community, and I saw the absolute hell that they went through and some of the things that they received. And it's hard to believe that, you know, in 2019, 2020, that such things could go on. And it is absolutely horrifying. And certainly they were, of course, victims of this. You fortunately have managed to withstand all of this. And of course, the other thing that's come into sharp focus in recent weeks is the very real threat to life that our MPs face as well. So I was listening to RBC this morning and someone was ringing in and complaining about, you know, as you were saying, about the government and their sense of entitlement. From the other side, we've heard about what it's like to work hard and to be faced with incredible challenges with racism, with anti-Semitism, sometimes with physical threats, and to still continue to do your job. So I just want to say, first of all, a huge yashka for all that you have done in all of this and that you continue to do. And I loved your comment that it's so ironic that Jeremy Corbyn probably forced you to have a stronger Jewish identity. Listen, as a rabbi, whatever it takes. Listen, I hope you thanked him for that. I think there's a lot of truth in that, by the way, that he's probably responsible for a lot of people feeling more proud of their Jewish identity. So there's irony for you. But a huge thank you. I believe we've got a little thank you for you, which Jeanette, who happens to be our Woman of the Year as well, is going to present. And can I just... And can I just say once again, thank you for joining us and thank you for all that you do. We wish you, I hope that the road ahead is a lot more peaceful and that you're able to get back to your passion, which is obviously helping those in need and not having to be on the back foot the whole time. And didn't realize you're 77. So please God, till 120, I know it's another 43 years, maybe, who knows. But certainly I wish you that the future you should be able to do what I'm sure you're most passionate about, rather than having to fight anti-Semitism on the back foot, to be able to get back to helping the community. And that you should not have to know the kind of abuse that you've known until now. And we just thank you once again. Please, a big round of applause for Dame Margaret.
And my way home. Thank you so much for that.